Josh Hawley thought a Harvard diploma gave him the edge. He sneered at Jasmine Crockett's background until she turned his insult into a weapon that cut deeper than any credential. Tens of millions watched his downfall unfold in real time. Can Harvard protect him from history's judgment? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The hearing room exploded with tension the moment the gavel dropped. Cameras flashed in rapid bursts, each shot carving the scene into history. This wasn't just another session, it was a spectacle broadcast live to the entire nation. Josh Hawley strode in like he owned the place, posture, stiff arrogance, dripping from every step. He scanned the chamber, lips curled into a mocking grin, as though he already tasted victory. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett sat unshaken, shoulders squared, eyes razor sharp. Before her lay a thick stack of files, each page a silent weapon. The air grew suffocating. Even seasoned reporters leaned forward, sensing blood in the water. Every second stretched the anticipation thick as smoke. Then Hawley struck voice slicing through the silence. "We have a few distinguished faces here today, and one from Dallas." Gasps rippled. Cameras zoomed in. Jasmine answered not with words but with a slow, knowing smile, deadly defiant, unbreakable. The silence from before shattered like glass as Hawley rose from his chair. The smug grin had returned, sharpened now into a blade he aimed at Jasmine Crockett. He puffed out his chest, voice swelling with pride, making sure every camera caught his words. "Harvard trains the leaders of this nation," he declared, his tone dripping with superiority. "And you graduated from a second-rate school, not Ivy League, no legacy, no pedigree." His words echoed, bouncing off the chamber walls, meant to humiliate her in front of millions. A ripple of laughter ran through the room. A handful of senators leaned back, smirks plastered on their faces, feeding off Hawley's arrogance. Reporters whispered to each other, pens scratching furiously the insult too sharp to miss. For a moment the balance tilted. Hawley had swung first, and his allies thought the blow had landed. Their laughter was cruel, calculated, designed to strip Jasmine of dignity. The chamber waited, sensing her next move. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't rush to defend herself. She sat in silence, every second of it louder than Hawley's taunts. Her eyes lifted not to him, but to the cameras broadcasting live to the entire country. She locked her gaze straight into millions of living rooms, steady and unbreakable. Then, with a voice clear and decisive, she struck. "Harvard also trained many lawyers who lost lawsuits over election fraud in 2020. The room froze, jaws tightening as her words sliced through the air. She didn't stop. Her finger pointed with precision, her tone a knife twisting in the wound. "Among them is you, Josh Hawley, Harvard Law, 2006, the man who voted against certifying the election. There's Ted Cruz, Harvard Law, 1995, who stood behind efforts to deny the results. There's John Eastman, Harvard Law, a key ally in the fraud campaign. And every one of them lost over 60 times in courts across this nation." Her cadence was relentless, each name a gunshot, each failure a scar she carved into the record. The chamber erupted in chaos. Gasps tore through the rows, reporters shouted over one another, and the storm of cameras flashed like lightning across marble walls. The words echoed louder than any gavel strike: Harvard fraud defeat. It was no longer a hearing. It was an indictment playing out live. The energy flipped in an instant, the humiliation boomeranging back onto Hawley with merciless force. What was meant as mockery now branded him a loser before the eyes of the nation. Hawley's face flushed red, fury boiling over. He slammed his hand against the table, the crack of wood shaking the microphones. His voice roared, trying to reclaim the room. "How dare you smear Harvard? This is an insult." His rage spilled, raw veins visible at his temples. His mask of control shattered. He pointed at Jasmine as though his finger could erase her words, but nothing could undo what millions had just heard. His power slipped with every shout. Jasmine leaned forward, unshaken, her tone as cold and cutting as steel. "No," she replied, her words steady as a verdict. "This is history, and history does not shield the defeated." Her voice rang out, final and undeniable. The entire chamber fell into stunned silence, broken only by the relentless clicking of cameras capturing the downfall of Harvard's pride. The battle line had shifted. The nation had just witnessed the moment Jasmine seized control. The chamber was still buzzing, flashes popping like thunder in a storm. Hawley leaned forward, his smirk sharpening into a sneer. His voice rose thick with mockery. "Do you even know a single clause of the Constitution?" He shouted, every syllable dripping contempt. "Or do you just chant cheap slogans to impress the cameras?" His allies chuckled, their laughter hollow but sharp, fueling his arrogance. Jasmine didn't blink. Slowly, she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small worn booklet, the Pocket Constitution. The cameras locked on it, zooming so tight the nation could see the creased cover. She flipped quickly her fingers, finding the page as though she had rehearsed it 100 times. Then she lifted her head and spoke with the force of a verdict. "Here it is, the 12th Amendment of the United States Constitution. It says the President of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate and House of Representatives, open all the certificates, and the votes shall then be counted. That is the law. And you, Josh Hawley, Harvard Law, 2006, stood here on January 6, 2021, and voted against certifying the will of the American people. You turned your back on this very clause." The words cracked like a gunshot. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Reporters scrambled pens, scratching cameras flashing nonstop. The gallery erupted in whispers. She nailed him. She pinned him to the Constitution itself. Hawley's face tightened, jaw clenching hard, his Harvard pride shattered by his own record. But Jasmine pressed harder, her eyes burning into his. She leaned toward the microphone, her voice steady and relentless. "You want to know what I know about the law? Let me tell you." A young black man, barely 18, was accused of a crime he did not commit. The system was ready to bury him alive. The prosecutor had a polished Ivy League attorney full of credentials, full of swagger, just like you. And me, I had nothing but the truth and the will to fight. I dug through their files, found the contradictions, exposed the lies. And in that courtroom, I won. That young man walked free because I refused to quit. The chamber hung on every word, the silence deafening. For a moment, the image of that boy, innocent, nearly lost, rose in every mind, watching both in the room and across the nation. The weight of Jasmine's words crushed the smirks, erased the chuckles, leaving nothing but raw tension. Hawley shot back, his voice trembling, desperate to claw back ground. "One isolated case," he barked louder than before, his tone shrill and cracking. "What does that matter compared to Harvard?" His hand slammed the desk, his face burning red. Jasmine didn't flinch. Her voice cut through his roar like a blade through glass. "One isolated case saves one life, and that is real justice, the kind you've never had the courage to face." The chamber froze, cameras flashing like lightning, the nation holding its breath. For that moment, everyone knew who truly carried the weight of the law. Under the crushing weight of Jasmine's last strike, Hawley scrambled for another angle. His eyes darted around the chamber, his smirk forced back onto his face. He raised his voice, the tone sharp, desperate to cut her down from a different direction. "Dallas," he sneered, stretching the name out like a curse. "A poor city riddled with crime. What pride can there be in a law school from there?" His words were acid, designed to wound, to paint her as nothing more than the product of a broken place. The chamber murmured, uneasy at the raw insult. Jasmine did not stay seated. She rose with sudden force, her chair scraping back, her presence towering over the room. Her voice cracked through the silence like thunder. "Dallas is where I was trained in fire and blood. That is the Harvard of real justice." The words rolled off her tongue, each one heavy with conviction, hitting harder than any insult he could muster. The chamber froze, the insult shattered by her defiance. She moved toward the screen behind her, pressing a button on her laptop. Images flashed across the room, crowded neighborhoods, weary workers in uniforms, mothers balancing children on their hips, school kids sharing tattered books. "These are my classrooms," she said, pointing to the faces on the screen. "These are my teachers, the people who taught me what justice really means, the ones I stood for when no one else would." Her voice shook the chamber. The smirks disappeared, replaced by lowered gazes and tightened jaws. Even Hawley shifted uncomfortably, his insult falling flat. The silence deepened, heavy as stone. Senators avoided her eyes, their faces pulled tight with shame. Reporters stopped scribbling, stunned by the raw power of the moment. For a long breath, the only sound was the hum of the projector and the steady rhythm of Jasmine's voice. She let the images sink in, let the country see exactly who she was fighting for. Her defiance was no longer just against Hawley. It was against every sneer, every dismissal of the lives she carried with her. Then she turned her gaze, locking on Hawley like a spotlight cutting through the dark. If Harvard taught you how to raise a fist and then run Dallas, taught me how to stand with the people. The line detonated in the chamber, gasps spreading like wildfire. The contrast was painted in neon, his cowardice, her courage. The words echoed louder than his mockery, branding the air with truth he couldn't escape. And then came the kill shot. Jasmine tapped her keyboard, and the screen behind her lit up with a video every American knew. The clip rolled Josh Hawley on January 6th, fist raised in solidarity with the mob outside the Capitol. The crowd in the video roared, their fists raised back. But then the footage shifted Hawley inside, sprinting down the marble halls, his face contorted with panic, fleeing the very chaos he had encouraged. The chamber erupted. Reporters shouted over each other, voices colliding in chaos. Photographers surged forward, cameras firing in a blinding storm of flashes. Senators gasped openly, some burying their faces in their hands. The air was electric, crackling with disbelief and fury. The images of Hawley's defiance and retreat played side by side, a living contradiction broadcast to millions. The mighty Harvard senator reduced to a man caught, running the echo of his shoes pounding down the halls, replaying like a drumbeat of disgrace. Hawley's face drained of color. His jaw tightened, but his eyes betrayed him, wide, frantic, cornered. Anger burned across his features, but beneath it lay something worse, fear. He shifted in his seat, fists clenched, but the mask of confidence had cracked wide open. The video stripped him bare, exposing him in the harshest light. He looked less like a senator, more like a man drowning under his own hypocrisy. Jasmine stood motionless, her expression calm, her voice steady as steel. "This is your Harvard legacy," she said, the words delivered like a verdict. "And me, I don't run. I stand with the people." The line landed like a hammer strike, shaking the chamber to its core. The silence after was deafening, the weight of her words suffocating every attempt at defense. Cameras kept flashing, capturing the moment that would replay for decades. Hawley sat frozen, fury and shame tangled on his face, unable to muster a single word. Jasmine's voice cut the silence one final time, low, but unyielding. "This is the truth, and the truth doesn't run." The chamber held its breath. The fight was over. Hawley's power, his prestige, his Harvard pride obliterated in front of the nation. The room was still trembling from the shock of the video, but Jasmine wasn't finished. She leaned down, hands steady, and pulled out a thick folder stacked with papers. The rustle of the pages cut through the silence, drawing every eye back to her. She lifted the folder high enough for the cameras to catch it. The seal of the January 6th committee stamped across the cover. The chamber tensed, everyone knew what was coming. This was no longer just a clash of words, it was evidence. She opened to a marked page, her voice clear and deliberate. "This is the official memorandum from the January 6th committee," she said, her tone slicing through the air. "And right here, Josh Hawley's name is listed among those senators who fueled the conspiracy, who gave breath to a lie that nearly tore this nation apart." Gasps erupted from the crowd. Reporters scrambled, snapping photos, shouting questions. The weight of the document was undeniable. It wasn't rhetoric, it was record. Jasmine turned another page, and her words carried like thunder. "On January 6th, 2021, you didn't just raise your fist. You sold Harvard's soul to a lie." The explosion was immediate. The gallery roared with noise, cameras firing, journalists yelling over one another, senators murmuring in disbelief. Hawley's face flushed crimson, his composure unraveling in front of millions. He gripped the edge of his desk, knuckles white, and tried to speak over the chaos. His voice cracked, trembling, despite the effort to sound strong. I was only doing my duty." He stammered the words, weak, swallowed by the storm around him. His defense fell flat, brittle against the solid weight of the evidence now hanging in the air. Jasmine didn't blink. She locked eyes with him, her tone dropping low, every syllable precise and deadly. "Your duty was to defend the Constitution," she said, her voice ablade. "Instead you ran. Harvard gave you a diploma. But history has given you cowardice." The words landed like a final strike, reverberating off the walls, searing into the ears of everyone watching. It was not just accusation, it was a verdict rendered live before the nation. The reaction was volcanic. Applause erupted from the chamber floor, a sound rarely heard in that solemn space. It wasn't polite clapping, it was raw, furious, defiant. Cheers followed shouts, rising above the thunder of hands striking together. Reporters shouted into cameras, broadcasting history in real time. The crowd drowned out Hawley completely, his protest lost beneath the roar. The very walls of the chamber seemed to vibrate with the force of the moment, as if democracy itself had found its voice through her. Hawley sat frozen, his lips moving without sound, every attempt to salvage himself swallowed whole by the storm. Jasmine stood tall, unshaken, the folder still in her hands, the cameras fixed on her face. The applause only grew louder, echoing far beyond those walls, reaching homes across America. In that instant, there was no Harvard, no pedigree, no title that could save him. There was only the truth, and the truth had spoken. As the last thunder of applause faded inside the chamber, the shockwave hit the outside world. Newsrooms cut into programming red banners, lighting up every screen as anchors spoke with breathless urgency. Homepages and mobile alerts blasted the same headline in bold. Crockett crushes Hawley Harvard buckles before Dallas. Producers rolled the clip on loop while commentators shouted over each other, trying to keep up with the avalanche. Lower thirds screamed, breaking news phones at stations lit up, and bookers chased anyone who had been in the room. Within minutes, the narrative hardened like concrete. Jasmine Crockett landed the punch that dropped a senator. Online, the video detonated. The confrontation flooded feeds on every platform, racking up millions of views in hours and climbing by the second. Editors sliced slow-motion replays of Hawley's fist and sprint stitched side by side with Jasmine's line that stopped the room. Reaction videos mushroomed duet after duet, shock, faces filling screens, captions screaming, "Watch till the end." Hashtags Harvard vs. Dallas and Harvard Runner surged to the top of the trending lists, turning the moment into a national referendum. Analytics dashboards spiked so hard some sites throttled, but the clip kept ripping through the web like a lightning strike. At Hawley's office, the backlash hit like a siren that wouldn't shut off. Phone lines rang without a breath between calls, queues stacked, then overflowed into voicemail until the system choked. Staffers scrambled with scripted answers, but the voices on the other end didn't want talking points. They wanted consequences. "You failed the Constitution," one caller barked, while another said, "We saw the tape, do your duty and own it." Email inboxes flooded, district pages groaned, and even the donation portal flickered as small-dollar donors slammed it shut. By late afternoon, aides whispered about bringing in extra hands just to log and categorize the fury. On Capitol Hill, the tone shifted like a sudden weather front. Senators who had smirked earlier kept their heads down, lips tight, no appetite for on-camera quips. Hallway scrums thinned as members ducked reporters, waving off questions with blank stares and nervous smiles. Inside committee rooms, the usual snickering vanished. Staffers traded low whispers and avoided eye contact when Jasmine's name came up. A few veterans of the chamber shook their heads and said nothing, reading the moment for what it was. No one laughed at Jasmine anymore. No one dared. The message was clear across the hill. Dallas had spoken, and Harvard had nothing to say. By nightfall, the counterattack arrived. Hawley stepped to a podium flanked by flags and hard lights, jaw set, voice pitched to carry. Reporters crowded forward, microphones thrust like bayonets. He lifted a finger trying to steady his tremor and declared, "The video is edited, the records are distorted." He repeated it louder as if volume could turn doubt into truth. Cameras clicked like gunfire, but the room smelled panic. The answer came fast and merciless. Networks cut to split screen, rolling the full uncut hallway footage with synced time codes and continuous audio. Producers stacked it beside the raw rally shot, no gaps, no jumps, no mercy. Chyrons read full footage, unedited. Fact-checkers published side-by-side timelines matching frames to security logs and committee transcripts. Anchors said the quiet part out loud. The claim collapsed on contact with the tape. Then the money moved. Emails from major donors hit inboxes with frosty phrases, pausing support, reassessing commitments, some scheduling conflicts. A weekend fundraiser went dark. The host pulled the venue and the caterer in one call. A corporate posse announced a temporary suspension, and 2 lobbyists stopped returning texts. The finance director stood at a whiteboard watching a wall of red lines bleed through projections. Staffers lowered their voices and avoided the cameras outside. Online, the verdict turned cruel. The Harvard runner meme flooded every feed. Hawley's raised fist freeze, framed beside his sprint loop to pounding drum tracks and stadium boos. Remixes stacked by the hour, 8-bit chases, silent film chases, slow-mo chases with operatic choirs. Late-night monologues wrote themselves. Punchlines landed before the applause sign lit up. Pollsters posted flash surveys showing trust numbers dropping like a trap door. By midnight, he wasn't the story, he was the punchline, and the internet never runs out of breath. As his unraveling press conference faded from the screens, a different story ignited. Jasmine's rise seized the national spotlight. Networks opened with the same on-air label, repeated like a drumbeat. The congresswoman from Dallas who shook Harvard. Anchors replayed her takedown in crisp, slow motion, then froze the frame on Hawley's face as the room flipped. Editorial boards posted midnight columns praising clarity over pedigree and courage over polish, warning power that receipts now rule. Producers stitched timelines, subtitles, and chapter markers, packaging the moment like a courtroom documentary for the morning rush. By sunrise, even cautious outlets adopted the phrasing, and the headline sounded less like commentary than consensus. In Dallas, the streets answered before the sun had fully burned the fog off Main Street. Neighbors poured out with homemade banners, block letters wet with paint, and resolve waving them like victory flags. "Stand tall," Jasmine, one sign read. Another shouted, "Dallas stands with you," as horns braided a jubilant chorus. Shop owners taped printouts of the headline to their windows, then passed out water bottles to strangers chanting her name. Church choirs stepped onto stone steps, harmonies ringing like a verdict sung to the open sky. A police escort crawled past murals and food trucks, not corralling a crowd, but clearing space for celebration. Across the country, non-Ivy alumni took their turn refusing to be footnotes in a story about gates and gatekeepers. Letters flooded offices and inboxes thick with coffee stains, and conviction, the ink pressing through like a heartbeat. "I worked 2 jobs to finish community college," one wrote, "and today I felt seen underlining the last word twice." A union hall in Akron sent a stack bound with twine. "You spoke our language, not theirs. Keep going, we've got you." A retired nurse from Fresno wrote, "Degrees are fine. Courage saves lives," the sentence framed by careful, trembling penmanship. Campus newspapers at state schools ran editorials with the same refrain, "Measure merit by service, not seals and ceremonies." Online, the numbers became their own headline, faster than any newsroom could refresh a rundown or edit a chyron. The confrontation clip vaulted past 10 million, then 30, then 50 spinning counters, like a slot machine hitting jackpots. Reaction videos multiplied by the minute, veterans, nodding students, roaring editors, circling the second the chamber surrendered. Creators muted the moment to let the silence speak, then remixed it with thunderclaps, gavels, and a heartbeat undercurrent. Title cards stayed brutal and brief. "Watch to the end," followed by a freeze frame that needed no narration. Analytics teams posted jagged graphs, arrows climbing like scaffolds, and the comments felt less like chatter than testimony. By evening, Jasmine had crossed from person to emblem, the human story forged into a banner you could carry. Posters appeared along bus stops and barber shops, her profile in bold strokes above the words, "Justice from the People." Volunteers handed out buttons on courthouse steps, and muralists traced outlines on brick where traffic would be forced to look. Neighborhood groups adopted the phrase for flyers, agendas, and prayer lists, turning it into a North Star everyone could follow. Commentators stopped calling her "Win a Fluke" and started calling it a standard, the new test for politics in daylight. In living rooms, union halls, and lunch counters, the sentence kept returning like a refrain, steady as a marching drum. By dawn, momentum crashed into the Capitol heavy as thunder rolling down marble corridors. Committee chairs opened hearings with a new refrain about the gap between elites and the people. Cameras followed every word as members asked whether pedigree had replaced proof and whether credentials had eclipsed courage. Floor speeches turned sharp, trading the language of prestige for the language of service. Old guard voices tried to slow the tide, but the chamber kept circling the same question: who does the law belong to, paper or people? The debate no longer felt abstract. It felt like a verdict forming in real time, and everyone could sense the balance shifting visibly. Fresh faces stepped to the microphones, young Black, Latino, Asian, and white, many from union families and modest schools. They told stories about night shift student loans and parents who kept the lights on with two jobs. One said, "I learned law in a county courtroom, not a marble hallway," and the chamber nodded. Another added, "service over salespeople over pedigree," and the phrase caught like a spark. Caucus rooms that once echoed with networking talk now pulsed with draft bills on access apprenticeships and public scholarships. The House and Senate did not turn sentimental. They turned practical, measuring merit by work that touched living lives. Requests poured in from public law schools, state colleges, HBCUs, and even community college paralegal programs. They wanted Jasmine to speak not about fame, but about process, grit, and receipts. She accepted the first round via video, then boarded flights to packed auditoriums where security had to hold the doors. On stage, she kept it plain: read the record, carry your clients, respect the oath, and the rooms erupted. Faculty Senate leaders admitted on camera that admissions brochures would change to honor service pathways alongside test scores. In lobbies, students posed beneath banners reading "Justice from the People" and promised each other they would keep the standard. Civil rights groups moved just as fast, treating the moment like a window that might close if they blinked. They layered city walls with posters of Jasmine's profile and the caption "Justice from the People," the ink still wet in the morning sun curling at corners. Union halls printed the same line on clipboards for voter registration drives, while church bulletins ran it above meeting times and potluck lists. Legal aid clinics used it on intake forms, reminding clients that the system must serve them, not the other way around, a promise in print. In interviews, organizers said the phrase worked because it was plain speech and a promise, not a slogan cooked up in a lab. Across neighborhoods, the message felt less like branding and more like marching orders, sturdy enough to carry door to door. Pollsters measured the shift with numbers that looked like a seismograph after a quake, jagged spikes climbing every chart. Jasmine's favorability surged into new territory, carried by independents and older viewers who prized steadiness under fire and fairness under pressure. Hawley's standing fell hard, battered by the replay and the nickname that would not die, a label stuck like glue. Donor calendars thinned event hosts, pulled invitations, and consultants spoke off the record about structural damage, the phrase they used before exits. Local radio callers used a different metric, saying, "I saw who stood still and who ran," and the lines lit up for hours, board lights blazing. Callers refused to hang up until heard fully. By week's end, the Hill's gossip had a single theme: power had felt the weight of proof, and proof had won clean and unmistakable. The echoes of the clash did not stop at the chamber walls. They spilled outward, carried by headlines, live broadcasts, and the endless churn of social media. Commentators hammered the same refrain across every network: a degree cannot cover the truth, and Harvard cannot shield cowardice. Anchors leaned into the phrase as if it had always existed, a new axiom forged in fire. The moment became less about one debate and more about the lesson it carved into stone: prestige on paper means nothing if the courage behind it collapses under pressure. Jasmine embodied that lesson with every step she had taken that day. She had not needed the golden halo of an Ivy League crest to steady her voice or sharpen her aim. She needed only her files, her memory, and the unshakable conviction that justice belonged to people, not to pedigree. Viewers replayed her lines again and again, marveling at how calm her tone stayed, even as Hawley cracked and raged. "This is what standing looks like," one commentator said on live television. "This is what happens when integrity doesn't bow." Hawley, by contrast, stood as the cautionary tale. His credentials glittered in brochures and alumni halls, but under the lights they meant nothing. He had raised his fist and then run, carried degrees, but failed his oath, wrapped himself in Harvard's robes, but stripped bare by his own fear. Analysts described it as the perfect inversion. The man who looked powerful became small, and the woman he tried to belittle became towering. Editorial cartoons showed him clutching a diploma like a shield only for it to shatter under the weight of truth. Across dinner tables, workplaces, and classrooms, the national argument took shape. People asked out loud, Harvard or Dallas, where is the real school of justice? Call-in shows filled with voices from truck drivers, teachers, nurses, and veterans. A caller from Ohio said Dallas taught her courage. Harvard taught him excuses. A retired soldier from Georgia growled, I've seen men run. I've seen men stand. One of them stood today, and it wasn't Hawley. The debate wasn't academic, it was personal, a mirror forcing America to choose what it valued more. When the hearing adjourned, the theater of it all reached its climax. Jasmine gathered her files, pushed back her chair, and rose with deliberate grace. The room was still humming with the force of her last strike, but she wore only a quiet, proud smile. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing like lightning voices shouting her name in a frenzy. She walked through them, steady her chin high every step, an exclamation point, to the day she had just written. Hawley followed behind, but the contrast could not have been sharper. His head hung low, shoulders bent under the weight of disgrace. He offered no words, no glances, no fight left to give. The cameras caught every second of it, the man once cloaked in Harvard pride reduced to silence and retreat. The sound was not of his footsteps, but of history closing in around him, sealing the judgment he could not escape. And then came the final line, broadcast live, seared into the nation's memory. A solemn anchor looked into the lens and delivered the verdict that tied the story together. In America, justice does not live on a diploma hanging on the wall. It lives in the heart of those brave enough to face the truth. The words landed like the last strike of a gavel, closing the chapter with authority. The broadcast cut away, but the tension lingered in living rooms across the country. It felt less like an ending than a reckoning, a reminder that courage has no alma mater. Viewers leaned back in their chairs, stunned, replaying what they had seen, knowing they had witnessed something that would not be forgotten. The stage was cleared, but the lesson burned. Bright truth stands, cowardice runs, and no degree on earth can change that. Thank you for watching until this moment, and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.